Here is your story, 3,000 words, simple English, clean grammar, no headings, no titles, no sections marked. Just the story, beginning to end. Nadia had made the biryani 3 times before she got it right. The first time, the rice was too soft. It broke apart in the spoon and clumped at the bottom of the pot like wet sand. She threw it away before anyone could see it. The second time, the spices were too strong, so strong that her eyes watered just standing near the stove. She ate it alone, at midnight, standing over the sink with a glass of water nearby. The third time, it was perfect. The grains stayed separate. The meat was tender. The smell moved through the house like something that had always lived there. That third time was the night before her wedding. She made it alone in her mother's kitchen in Lahore, with the overhead light buzzing the way it always did and the sound of her cousins laughing somewhere in the back of the house. Nobody came to help her. Nobody asked if she needed anything. She was 27 years old, getting married the next morning, and she spent her last night as her mother's daughter standing over a pot of rice, counting cardamom pods and feeling, for the first time in years, completely calm. Her mother came in once, briefly, to check on something in the fridge. She looked at the pot. She looked at Nadia. "Don't overcook it," she said, and left. Nadia stirred the rice. She had learned to cook the same way she had learned most things, by watching, by repeating, by getting it wrong enough times that eventually she stopped getting it wrong. Her mother was not the kind of woman who taught by explaining. She taught by doing, and if you were paying attention, you learned. If you were not paying attention, you went hungry or you figured it out yourself. Nadia had always been paying attention. The wedding was large, the way weddings in her family always were. 300 people, a hall rented months in advance, flowers brought in from another city. She wore red. Her husband, Tariq, wore a cream-colored sherwani and looked nervous in the way that men sometimes look nervous, not scared, just very aware that something important was happening and that they had very little control over it. She liked that about him. He knew what he didn't know. They had met 2 years before through families, which sounds arranged and formal, but the truth was that the first time they talked for 4 hours about completely unrelated things, a documentary about deep-sea fish, the best way to eat a mango, whether it was possible to truly love a city you were born in or whether you had to leave first and come back. He had opinions. She had stronger ones. By the end of the evening she had decided she could live with this person. Love came later. It came quietly, the way good things often do, without announcing itself. After the wedding, she moved into his family's house. This was not unusual. It was simply the way things were done. His mother, Zubaida, was a careful woman, not unkind, but watchful. She watched everything Nadia touched. She watched how Nadia folded the laundry, how she greeted guests at the door, how she poured tea. Not with cruelty, but with the particular attention of a woman who had run a household for 30 years and was not entirely sure she was ready to share the running of it. Nadia understood. She was patient. She was always patient. The kitchen, though, was a different matter. In the kitchen, Zubaida was not watchful. She was present. She was there every morning by 6, already moving, already working. She knew where everything was before she reached for it. She never looked at a recipe. She measured by feeling, a handful of this, a pinch of that, enough water until it looks right, and the food that came out of her hands was always good. Always warm. Always exactly what the meal needed. Nadia stayed out of the kitchen for the first 3 weeks. She helped with other things, cleaning, shopping, sitting with Zubaida's mother-in-law in the afternoons when the old woman wanted company. But the kitchen belonged to Zubaida, and Nadia respected that the way you respect a room with its own history. Then came the Sunday of Tariq's father's birthday. His name was Hamid. He was a large man with a loud laugh and opinions about cricket that he shared whether or not you asked for them. He was not mean. He was not particularly thoughtful. He was simply a man who took up space in a room and assumed that was fine, because for 60 years it had been. Zubaida had been planning the birthday meal for 2 weeks. She had written a list. She had assigned different dishes to different people. On the Wednesday before, she caught a fever. Not a serious fever, the kind that tells you to rest, that reminds your body it is not a machine. But on the Saturday morning, she was still not well, and the meal was the next day, and the list was still on the fridge with half the items uncrossed. Nadia read the list. She crossed off everything that had already been done. She looked at what remained. Then she went to the market herself, without telling anyone, and she came back with everything on the list and also a bunch of coriander that nobody had asked for but that she knew the biryani would need. She cooked for 6 hours. She did not make a single phone call asking for advice. She did not look up a single recipe on her phone. She worked the way her mother had worked, from memory, from feeling, from the accumulated knowledge of 1,000 quiet evenings spent paying attention. The kitchen smelled, by 4 in the afternoon, like something that had been planned carefully and made with care. Tariq came in at some point and stood in the doorway. "You didn't have to do this," he said. She handed him a spoon and pointed at the pot. He tasted it. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he nodded, slowly, like a man confirming something he had suspected but hadn't been sure of. "Good?" she asked. "Extremely," he said. He set the spoon down and left, and she went back to work. The next day, the family gathered. Aunts, uncles, cousins, a few neighbors, a man named Rafiq who had been Hamid's friend since childhood and who ate more than anyone else at every meal and never once commented on the food. The table was full. The room was loud. It had the particular noise of a family that argues about small things because they love each other too much to argue about the real things. Hamid sat at the head of the table. He looked at the spread in front of him. He looked at Zubaida, who was there but still pale, sitting carefully, not eating much. He looked around the table. Then his eyes landed on the biryani, the large pot in the center, the grains catching the light, the whole spices resting on top like punctuation. "Who made this?" he asked. There was a small silence. "Nadia," Tariq said, without hesitation, without making a thing of it. Hamid looked at her. She was passing a bowl of raita to someone at her left and had not looked up yet. He said, "Can you really cook?" The room did not go quiet. That would have been dramatic, and real life is rarely that dramatic. The room kept going, someone laughed at something, a child knocked a spoon off the table, Rafiq was already reaching for the biryani with the focus of a man who did not care about the conversation. But Nadia heard it. She heard every word of it, and she heard the thing underneath the words, which was not really a question about cooking at all. She set down the bowl of raita. She picked up the serving spoon. She filled Hamid's plate, rice first, then a piece of meat, then the caramelized onions on top, then the small sprig of coriander that nobody had asked for but that she had brought anyway because she had known it would matter. She did all of this without rushing. When his plate was full, she looked at him directly. "Taste it first," she said. "Then ask me." Hamid looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at his plate. He picked up his fork and he tasted the rice. Just the rice. Then he took a proper bite, rice and meat together, the way the dish was meant to be eaten. He chewed. He was quiet. This was unusual for Hamid, who was not often quiet about anything. He said nothing for a moment that was long enough for Tariq to look at Nadia and for Nadia to look back at him with an expression that said, "I am fine." Then Hamid put his fork down and turned to Zubaida. "You need to rest more often," he said. Zubaida looked at him. "Because when you rest," he said, nodding toward the biryani, "apparently this happens." There was laughter. Real laughter, the warm kind, not the polite kind. Rafiq said something appreciative with his mouth full. Someone asked Nadia what she had put in the rice, and she said cardamom and mace and a small amount of rose water, and 3 people at once said they could taste the rose water, which was not true, she had used very little, but they believed they could taste it because the food had made them feel a certain way and they wanted to explain the feeling. Hamid did not apologize for the question. That was not the kind of man he was. But he held out his plate for a second serving, and in that gesture was everything the apology would have contained and more. The meal continued. Nadia ate. She talked to Tariq's aunt about something unrelated, a garden, a television series, a road in the city that had finally been fixed after 10 years. She laughed at a story Rafiq told that was probably not entirely true. She helped clear the table when the meal was done. That night, after the guests had left and the family had settled into the comfortable tiredness that follows a good meal, Nadia washed the pots. She had not been asked to. Zubaida had tried to get up and do it, and Nadia had simply said, "Sit," and Zubaida, for once, had sat. Tariq came and stood beside her at the sink. he picked up a dish towel. He started drying. They didn't talk about what had happened at lunch. Not about the question, not about the answer, not about the silence that had stretched between the question and the answer like a river that needed crossing. Some things don't need to be discussed to be understood. The conversation had already happened. It was in the food, and it was in the plates, and it was in the fact that Nadia had made the coriander decision on her own and been right about it. Tariq dried the last pot and hung the towel. "You knew exactly what you were doing," he said. It was not a question. "I always do," she said, and she meant the cooking, and she also meant everything else. She dried her hands on her dupatta. The good one, the wedding one, already marked at the hem with a faint yellow stain from the turmeric she had used the day before. She looked at the stain for a moment. She did not mind it. In fact, she thought it looked like something that belonged there, like a signature in the margin of a book. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in the house without anyone deciding to shift it. The kitchen, which had been Zubaydah's alone, became something shared. Not divided, shared, which is different. Zubaydah still came in at 6 every morning. But now she sometimes came in to find that Nadia had already made the chai. She would stand at the kitchen door and look at the 2 cups on the counter, and she would pick one up and she would say nothing, and the nothing she said was warm. They cooked together for the first time on a Thursday, making something simple, a dal, a vegetable dish, chapati. No occasion. No birthday. Just a Thursday. Zubaydah corrected Nadia on the salt, once. Nadia accepted the correction without drama. Nadia corrected Zubaydah on the heat under the pan, once. Zubaydah accepted it with a short, precise that meant the same thing. They were learning each other. Hamid ate everything and said very little, which was, Nadia had come to understand, his version of praise. He was a man who showed appreciation through appetite. If he came back for seconds, the food was good. If he came back for thirds, it was extraordinary. On the evening of that first Thursday dinner, he came back for thirds of the dal, which was the least impressive dish on the table, and Nadia understood that he was not eating the dal. He was making a point. She gave him more dal. She did not smile. But inwardly, in that quiet place where she kept the things that mattered, she filed it away carefully, next to the look on Tariq's face when he had tasted the biryani, next to the coriander decision, next to the feeling of standing at her mother's stove the night before the wedding, counting cardamom pods, completely calm. There is a kind of woman who proves herself loudly, who announces her abilities, who makes sure everyone in the room knows what she is capable of, who needs the acknowledgement to feel the accomplishment is real. Nadia was not that woman. She had never been that woman. She was the kind of woman who simply did the thing, and did it well, and let the doing speak. She had learned this in her mother's kitchen. She had learned it at 6 years old, watching hands that never measured anything and always got it right. She had learned it at 12, when she burned a pot and washed it herself and tried again. She had learned it at 27, alone with a buzzing light and the sound of cousins laughing somewhere far away, the night before the rest of her life started. The question, "Can you really cook?" had not been a small question. It had been the whole question. It had been, "Who are you, and do you belong here, and are you someone we have to make room for, or someone who will simply take up her own space quietly and without asking permission?" Her answer had been on the plate. It had been in the cardamom and the mace and the rose water that nobody could taste but everyone felt. It had been in the coriander nobody asked for but everyone remembered. It had been in the second serving, and the third serving, and the dish towel Tariq picked up without being asked, and the chai already made when Zubaydah came downstairs on a cold morning, and the that meant more than it sounded like. She had not said, "I can cook. I can do this. I belong here. Give me a chance and I will show you." She had said, "Taste it first." And everything after that had been the tasting. That's your story, approximately 3,000 words, simple clean English, no headings, no section breaks, and built to hold attention all the way through. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments to the tone, length, or ending.